Welcome to class 2 in our education series. Our speakers today are going to be Faith Brown, CSI, CDT, and SCIP, who's a specifications writer at Integrated Spec Solutions. And our other speaker is Sherry Harbaugh, FCSI, CCS, RA, and SCIP from Technical Resources Consultants, Inc. All right, so if you two want to kick it off, and we're looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things we did not discuss is who should lead off. So I guess I'll take that role. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Faith Brown. I have been an independent spec writer now for a little over 9 years independently. And then before that, I was working for a firm where I got my start. So a little over 15 years now, I've been writing specifications. So I have a background of being with the firm and independent. So I'll be speaking from those viewpoints today.
Thanks, Faith. I'm Sherry Harbaugh. I'm president of TRC, Technical Resources Consultants, and founder of Specs Education Online, which is an online resource with small bits of information about specifications, just your basic answers. While I've been a specification consultant for nearly the last almost 30 years now, I've been shifting my business to teaching specifications and career coaching. So our objectives today are to help designers understand how to effectively communicate with specifiers about their projects. And I think Faith and I have a bunch of ideas about this. So we're going to just go ahead and kick it off, and we welcome you to put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer them and, review them or, talk about them as they come up today. So getting started, Faith?
Yeah. So one of the first things that Sherry and I discussed was, when should you bring your spec writer on board? When should you schedule time to work with your spec writer? I think from my perspective, I'd like to get started when you start working on the drawings, because if I'm part of the team right from the beginning, I think it eliminates some of the last minute hurriedness that happens when we're brought on later in the process. I understand that that is not always practical sometimes, and I hate to say it, but sometimes I think the spec writer is a last minute thought. Oh, we need specs on this project, or perhaps we didn't think we needed specs on this project because of the nature of the project, and now we had things change and we need a spec writer immediately. So we try to be flexible with those things, but Sherry, from my perspective, I'd rather be brought on early on. How about you?
Yeah, regardless of, I think the timing is the big one, right? Regardless of the specification I'm working on, I need to be able to estimate how much time it's going to take to meet the schedule. So whether you bring me on at 50% or at, SDs, I need to know what's the schedule, how many submittals, how many deliverables do you expect from me? And when is it going to be published? Because sometimes they give me a deadline and I meet it and they're like, oh, well, we're not issuing for another week. So I need a real life schedule. I want to be part of the team. And I think that's a comment I get from a lot of in-house specifiers too, is they don't feel like they're part of the team. They don't feel like they were talked to about, hey, what works for you? Because whether you're in-house or out of house, you're juggling a lot of projects at the same time.
Right.
So not having that information, it makes it really hard for us to meet those deadlines. So being part of the team and knowing what those your deadlines are, and keep in mind too, give us 20 to 30 hours to do that first draft.
Right.
We're not going to turn that around in a week. And please take account also, like I said, we're juggling a lot of projects.
Yeah.
So it's not something, that can magically appear.
Right.
Even if they say, just change the footers on the last one, it doesn't always work that way.
Well, and I think to that point, I recently had a project where they trickled in information over the last week. It's the final bid that we're putting out. And they trickled in information over the week. And in my book, I thought, okay, I have a question about that. I have a question about that. I'm going to wait until he's responded to all of my questions because they were coming in so sporadically. And then I was going to respond to him, and I responded, and he said, oh, I wanted that today. And I said, well, you never communicated that to me. So it's really important, you know, to put your expectations in your email. That communication is so important for us.
Mhm. Are there any questions or comments coming in?
I don't see any in
Melissa,
our
you didn't see
chat.
any? Okay.
Let's move along a little bit. What are your processes then for that communication, Sherry? Do you have specific strategies in place?
Yeah, so what I like to do is when I do that initial material takeoff, I like to get all my questions out there. These are the things I know. These are the things I don't know. In-house, I use an Excel spreadsheet, very basic. It's got the, you know, section number and title, and then it's got the item that's going to be required, you know, whatever it is, bike racks. And then it might have a description of it. Or if there's no description, then it's a question, you know,
Yeah.
what are the bike racks? So I try to keep that those columns alive, and then I hide them all during, you know, when I go to print. So they're always there. So
Yes.
that's how I track it for communicating with the design professional.
Yes.
What do you have in your
Oh,
office?
I do very much the same thing. And one of the things I forgot to mention early on is that now that I'm working with a team, I have other fingers in the pot, so to speak, when we're putting a project together. So to have that living record, that Excel sheet that we're all working off of, like I try to be really specific in my questions. I found this detail. It shows that there are bike racks. It says on one page that landscape is doing it, on another page it says that it's going to be covered by somebody else. I need clarification, like whose scope is this going to be under? And so I'm very specific in my Excel form so that the next person who opens it, with whether it's Amber or Janet, they go, oh, Faith has a question on this too. Maybe I heard something, or, you know, then we can cooperate that way amongst our team and amongst our design team with the architect. So yes, that Excel sheet is so important to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the other thing to keep in mind too, whether you're hiring out of house or in-house, is when we're trying to figure out how much time it's going to take, we figured in about a week for the design professional to respond to us.
Mhm.
So I'm going to send questions about a week prior to the deadline.
Mhm.
To give the design professional, you know, a week to pick up the comments. And then I kind of figure, okay, if they respond with everything on this list, it's going to take me 3 hours to pick it up. So that's what I budgeted into my week. So that kind of goes back to the schedule, is knowing that there's going to be some communication back and forth, and we need to account for that time. So if I say it's going to take me 20 hours, that doesn't include the extra week in between there that I'm giving the design professional to answer my questions.
Yes. You know, speaking to that, also one of the things we've started to do in, I don't want to say managing our design professional, but it's almost managing our own schedule with our design professional, is when we send over our questions, we're putting in, can you please respond to these by this date so that we have time to incorporate your responses? Because I found that if we leave it open, they send it the day before. It's happened so many times. They send it the day before, and then I'm racing, trying to put out a good product. And as a perfectionist, which it's not a good thing to be a perfectionist and a spec writer, but as a perfectionist, I am so stressed out at that last minute trying to publish and get all of the information into that spec. So yes, I have been giving my clients deadlines. And they've been pretty responsive to that. I've been pretty pleased. So
Yeah, one of the other processes that needs to be taken into account is working with your consultants. So especially in the Seattle area, there are more and more projects that have building enclosure consultants on them. And sometimes they write none of the specs, and sometimes they want to write all of them. And then there's a happy medium.
right.
The other day I was like, well, they're going to write 6. I'm like, which ones? Which 6 are they going to write? It would sure be great to know that now. Instead of all the specs coming in at the same day, at the same time, and we're supposed to compile them, and there's no joint sealants.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, we're putting together joint sealant specs. So coordinating with the consultants is also going back to that good old schedule, but also
Yeah.
part of the process and procedure is finding out it early
Mhm.
which consultants are writing which sections, who's responsible for what.
Yeah, and on that note, Sherry, thanks for bringing that up. One of the things that we started doing early on, even before we have a submittal due, is I will ask the architect, hey, do you want me to coordinate with the consultants over these sections, or do you want to be the middleman? Do you want to just be like a CC'd on the email?
Right.
But I need to find out what sections are these consultants planning on providing, even if it's just a general idea, and what are those potential overlaps? I don't know how many times I've had a landscape section jump into 05500 a metal fab, or even into our Division 7 for rooftop gardens or whatnot. So like just to be able to coordinate those among the consultants. And then even, I've had a few where I said, hey, if you insist you need 05500, make it 0550.13, and that will be the landscape. And you can live
Or-
independently, because the last thing I want to do is take responsibility for the section you've provided and somehow edit it to incorporate into the overall project. So yeah, that early on coordination with those consultants is so important. Mhm.
And it seems like more consultants are writing their own specs these days.
Yeah.
A lot of that used to fall on me, like they would ask me to write structural or give them a guide spec for civil. I don't get that anymore. More of them, like building enclosure consultants, are writing them on their own.
Yeah.
So that makes more coordination for us in-house before we publish.
Right.
Should we
Yeah.
move on? Any questions before we leave that topic? We got a quiet crowd out there.
They're just taking in all of the spec information.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the questions that I received via email from somebody who wasn't able to attend is related to this.
Oh,
What is the best practice option for exchanging markups back and forth with the specification consultant, both with the team as well as with the other consultants? Um, this person in particular, they've done it all via email, but it can be confusing in the tracking. Have you
mhm.
done anything that seems to work a little more efficiently?
Oh, yes. One of the things that I have adopted wholeheartedly and even push a little bit toward my clients is Bluebeam. I love Bluebeam. Um, Working with the architects, I find it really helpful to be able to not only see in real time what they're marking up, but to respond to it, um, to be able to tag that client and say, oh, we have this actually in this section where it belongs, is sometimes a common thing that I'll say. And then also within my team, I do all of our QA markups in Bluebeam for my team to respond to and coordinate with that way. So Bluebeam has been extremely helpful for us.
I agree with that, Faith. I use Bluebeam all for that too, and I even have a
Mhm.
little check mark stamp. So
Yep.
when I pick up a comment, I put a check on it. So
Yep.
if it ever comes back to me and they're like, why didn't you pick that up? I can say, I did pick it up. I don't know why it's not in there. But being able for me to track it too, or down in the comments below, say accepted by, and it'll say accepted by Sherry, or, and it'll,
Yep.
document it right there. So I too have found that that's a great documentation tool. I know I don't personally use SpecLink. I know there are some people probably on the call that do use SpecLink, and I'm wondering if anybody could talk to that, because they do have a collaboration tool within SpecLink where you can share with the consultants and have them do comments. Melissa, do you?
Yeah, so I work for an independent specifications company and we use SpecLink. However, we we have very, very, very few projects where people are actually coordinating in there. And it's just a little bit more difficult to run through and find those comments. So we actually primarily use Bluebeam as well.
Oh,
And for all of our coordination, it's just a much easier process and people don't have to learn a new system, which is usually the bigger issue there. Um, we do very similar to both Sherry and Faith, but to mark something complete, we actually create custom statuses. And so we have customized statuses that'll be this is an architect action, or this is our action, or this is for the various consultants and completed, or team meeting agenda. so that it's a little easier for us to filter through the various comments. But same thing, Bluebeam for us is definitely the gold standard in our opinion.
Yeah,
Who doesn't like a good checklist, right?
that's right. Yeah. Any other comments from the participants on communicating? Oh, still quiet out there.
Yeah, no comments. If anybody does want to leave a comment, just put it in the group meeting chat and then I can ask these two. Or you can raise your hand and ask it directly.
Okay. So why have a spec writer on the job at all? And I'm going to speak to being an out of house, an independent consultant for so many years. One of the biggest things that I see is I've been exposed to a bunch of different projects and a bunch of different clients with a bunch of different ideas and different products that they want to use on. So when I am looking at a project and the architect's like, yeah, I don't know what to use here or there or whatever, I might have some ideas. I'm like, oh, well, I just used this on another job and this architect really liked it. Do you want to, do you want to consider this product? So I think exposure to products is one of the strong points of having a spec writer on an independent or in-house. I think in-house spec writers are great too, because they're also exposed to a lot of materials. And then they can say, well, this team used this, maybe you want to explore this product. As well as we know a lot of manufacturers because we're working with manufacturers all the time.
Right. I think sometimes we also fall into that backup researcher of products and systems for our client design professional. Just because we do have a little bit more like resources, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Those other contacts of people that we've had similar product issues with. So we become that researcher, kind of out-of-house researcher, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and being contacted, even if it's a project, they're like, oh, well, you didn't work on this project, but I'm having a problem with this. Can you make a recommendation of who to contact? Well, yeah, we usually have a Rolodex. That's, or not a real Rolodex. David Axe has one, he's gonna hold it up. Anyway,
Nice one, David.
we usually know somebody who knows somebody, and that's one of our strong points. Is we may not know the answer, but we probably know someone who does know the answer, who can get you out of that bind.
That's right. And then we have specialized training. We have really dove into these industry standards that we use constantly, the master format, what goes in the drawings versus what goes in the specs, coordinating that terminology, those types of things that sometimes get lost in the weeds when you're putting a building together from the design team professional standpoint. That's what we do. We work on those intricate details of coordination in regards to the details of the specs of the drawings.
Yeah, one of the great examples is going back to terminology is a lot of people know hardy board as hardy board, but actually is fiber cement board. It's not fiber cement siding. It's not hardy board. That's a proprietary name. A lot of people don't know that. The other one I see on I would say 90% of the drawings I look at is firelight. How many people don't realize that firelight is proprietary?
Right.
And I'll be like, and that's not even the right product for where you've got to go. Well, we just need fire rated glazing. We'll write fire rated glazing then. Yeah. Put firelight there. So some of that information where people hear it and it's like Kleenex. Do you have a Kleenex? They don't think tissue, they think Kleenex. Right. So it's that type of terminology that we can help get straight before you go out to bid.
Right. And the way that I communicate that back to my design professional then is either in the questions log, or sometimes I have like clouded things on the drawings for them before when it's come through several times and we've talked about it. And oh, yeah, here's one more hardy board. Is that your real intent? Yeah.
Do a search. Speaking of Bluebeam, for those types of things, I would just type in Hardy in the search. And even in your drawings, it will pull up every occurrence of the word Hardy. So there's ways to use Bluebeam that are super beneficial. I mean, even more so than what we just talked about for tracking decisions and coordinating.
If I can interject something,
Yeah.
what you kind of guys are alluding to is an advantage of hiring an independent consultant is kind of a quality control. I know with me, I'm not paid to do quality control, but I will often look at the drawings and say, you might want to look at, the SSMA manual and see how they're doing it, or like you were saying, it says drywall over here, it says sheetrock over here, it says gypsum board over here, it says GWB over here, which one?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
And-
I think that's fair, a fair point, that there's multiple different keynotes here. And oftentimes I know that the drawings are put together from previous drawings sometimes, and then those notes all carry over. And so they have some cleanup to do and to fine tune their terminology. So I think having that fresh pair of eyes from the spec writer is so helpful, because how many times have you gotten into a project and you're like, this thing is great. And then you go back and you look at it, I don't know, a year later, and you're like, what was I thinking? How did I miss that? Because we all do it. We get so far invested into our project that we can't see what's right in front of us.
It's the tree forest thing, and we're a set of eyes that look at it just for the very first time.
Yeah.
We're not familiar with anything about the project other than what's given to us on the drawings, and be able to look at that. So.
And that goes for the specs too.
Mhm.
I think that's the importance of the architect of record looking at the specs, is because we're so close to the forest too, that we'll see stuff. I'll go back a year later and go, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? We get in a hurry too. So we're equally at fault of doing the same things in the specs as there is on the drawings, which is again a great reason to have that QA/QC, somebody just one more time looking at it before it goes out.
Yep.
And so a question similar to why I have a spec writer on the job. Why have specifications? There was a message on LinkedIn today, or somebody had posted a comment saying that specifications mean less because so much is controlled by the GC at this point. They're making so many of the selections. That's not to say that specifications aren't important. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of specifications in and of themselves?
Yes. That's such a big topic. I'm not sure where to start. I mean, the very flat answer is it's a legal obligation to have specifications on your project, depending on how it's written. I understand that with contractors on board, a lot of the times I do a lot of work with owners who are the contractor. So that provides like its own unique Division 1, because they don't want a lot of submittals because they're the owner, so they don't need to review what they've already said they want, right? It's one of those, why is my right hand slapping my left? So at the same time, they still need a spec because they have legal obligations to their lien holders or their banking, their financial institutions, those things. So the specs are important, not just for legal reasons, but because we provide an element of quality. So in those specifications specifically, I hate to use those two words together, we have pulled out a lot of the submittals, but we still lean on the standards. So the quality assurance, the standards, the ASTMs, the IBC, those are the things that we put in there. I don't specify finish. I don't specify product. I specify quality. And I think that's the thing that we bring as specification writers.
I would agree with that. And I would also add expectations. If you don't have a spec, what are your expectations? What do you even want? And how do you convey that to the contractor? At least your specification, even if you say, yeah, the contractor's going to go out and get whatever they want, at least they're getting to the level that the expectation has been set through the specification. Because you can't do that verbally because there's no contract. You know, if you say, well, I want to, you know, premium grade casework, well, you can't hold somebody to that just by verbally saying that that's what you want. I think
Yeah.
having it written down gives everyone an expectation of the quality level that we're going to come out in the end. We want to build a successful project.
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily, I don't know, however you want to define success, is like everybody's going to walk away happy. Everyone's going to walk away with what their vision was for the project.
Yeah.
And if it's not written down and enforced somehow, then there's going to be some disappointed parties.
Yeah, and I think it eliminates a lot of back and forth too. So thinking again about my clients who are the owners and the contractors, they still have subs. They still have manufacturers that are supplying product to them. And so if they have a written document that says, this is what I want, just like you were saying, Sherry, this is the level of expectation. I'm not going to have to go back to you 4 or 5 times saying, nope, not that, not that, not that. I really want this because it's already there in the spec.
Right. So it's also that, like you said, it's the contract between the contractor and the subcontractor that we're also, even though the specifications are written to the contractor, there's some expectations there that they're using those to leverage work with their subs. Our opinion. Of course.
In our
Anyone else have an opinion? Anybody else want to chime in on that?
No, I thought that was great.
Okay. So should we move on then, Sherry?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the process of writing specs. Is that where you want to go?
Yeah, looking at guide specs.
Okay. Yeah, so there are different ways that we can start a project. So this is really just down to the nitty-gritty. How does a spec get put together? A lot of times we start with a guide spec. Sometimes we will start with a spec that we have used over time or written ourselves based on whatever the product is. Just recently, I don't know if this is a new product to any of you guys, but Phil's felt, that was new to me. And so I didn't find a spec out there until we searched, but then of course it's the manufacturer spec. And so there was some fine tuning to do. That's a new spec to me. So we had to put that together and put it into our project. So yes, there are manufacturer specs, which are quite good. But I think all of them need to be a little vetted so that they're not proprietary. And then there are other guide specs like master spec or spec link or e-specs. Or am I missing one? Conspectus, I guess.
There's a lot of them.
There's
Yeah.
so many options right now. But those guide specs, you know, sometimes I'm reviewing those just to pull like bits and pieces from them, not using them as a whole, but pulling information that can be useful for the project that I'm on.
Yeah, and there's some proprietary specs out there. And I think one of the things that we need when we're communicating with the design professional is, what is the product that you want? Most products have a lot of options. So we need to know what's the thickness. We don't, not necessarily the color, like Faith mentioned, we don't often put the colors in the specification anymore. There was a day that we did, and that's kind of moved. I don't know, on my projects, it's moved on. They don't want us touching the colors. They don't even tell me anymore. But we at least need to know, if we're going to specify the metal roof, you know, what's the gauge? Is it galvanized or galvalume or aluminum or zinc? You know, what's the material? So it takes more than just saying I want a metal roof. There's, you know, 5 or 6 decisions that go with each one. So to get a PDF that has all your selections highlighted or circled or somehow conveyed to the specification writer, it sure helps us put that cake together. You know, we need all the ingredients laid out. We need the eggs, flour, sugar, and butter before we can actually make the cake. So same with the specification. We need to know all your decisions before we can put it together. And the more we have up front, the less back and forth. Right. Because otherwise we get it and it's like, okay, now we have these 5 more questions. Even fire extinguishers. I mean, come on. There's a lot of decision that has to go into a fire extinguisher. Right? So we need to have that information so that we can put it together once the first time. I like to do fire extinguishers, you know, in 10 minutes. That's my easy spec. But boy, if I don't have any information, a back and forth to try to figure out what the fire extinguisher cabinet even looks like.
Right.
So having that information communicated saves everyone a bunch of time.
Mhm. Yeah, and you know, I have to say, Sherry, kind of following up on that, one of the projects that I recently did, they had called out wood, plank, wall, and ceiling. Great. That sounds like a great design choice to me. And so I'm scouring the drawings for some kind of detail or reference, like to give me some kind of information as to, is this like a custom product that they're putting on the wall where I'm going to specify it in Division 6, or is it an actual system like a linear wood ceiling that I would specify in Division 9? So on and on I go. I've had this question on my list for the last 6 months. And I finally pinned them down and I said, my original assumption was this was a linear wood ceiling similar to Armstrong Woodworks, blah, 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 blah. I said, however, this detail that I found in your recent drawings leads me to believe that it may be a custom element. Can you please provide clarification? And I had pinned into my email these details of
Images.
every like I led them down the road so that they knew exactly what I was thinking. And the next thing they said was, oh yeah, we want to use Armstrong Woodworks because they saw it in the spec and they said that looked great. They never communicated back to me that that's what they're now designing around.
So that goes back to where you were doing the research for them.
A little bit. I was,
Because they kind of knew a concept, but instead of talking to you about it, they just kind of left it there
they left it there.
with a no decision.
It was a no decision. It was already in the spec. They liked it. They changed their things to match it. And I thought, okay. But I don't know that because again, the details seem to lead me down the road to it's a custom wood plank.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's some of the back and forth. That's super fun.
We had a question come in. Did you see that, Faith?
Yeah, it says from Susan, how are you approaching the changes to master spec Word files transitioning to spec point database by Deltek? Oh, Susan, yes, this is a great question. How are we approaching it? So I'm going to be super honest. I am approaching it. Last year, I did the bury my head in the sand, hope it goes away kind of approach. And this year we are addressing it more in the, okay, let's figure out what the spec point really is and how can it help us. Do I have any definitive answers? No, because we're really early on that. Sherry, do you have anything for that?
No, I've not used master spec for probably 10 years at least. So I'm not, I didn't even go there when that happened.
That was a non-issue for you.
Yeah. Are there, I think David Axe, are you still, I think you were on it.
What's the question?
Are you,
Go ahead.
spec point? How are you transitioning to spec point?
I'm not.
You're not gonna do it. Sorry, Susan. We've got non-answers.
I don't know anybody that has.
Okay.
I know
Yeah.
a few people that have looked at it, but I don't know anybody that is.
Okay.
I have recently had conversations with other spec writers in other cities who are looking at spec point and seeing if that might be feasible. And I think that's probably where I'm sitting right now too with our firm is it feasible? Is it something that we can make work for us? Or is it something that we're just not going to touch? I'm not sure yet how we're going to address that. Sorry, Susan.
Yeah. And just to put in there for our firm, we use SpecLink, but we do maintain a subscription to Master Spec because we use it for additional reference. We really like the evaluation documents, all those sort of things. So we're kind of in the same path as Faith, where we're evaluating spec point. But basically, what we're going to try to do is we don't want everybody to learn how to use another program that we're just not going to use in our everyday work. And so instead, we're going to try to figure out how we can just export everything into Word so people can continue using the same process and then evaluate a little bit more what SpecPoint can do for us.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Thanks, Melissa. That's exactly. I feel like I feel better about that now because that's the direction we're going. So thanks, Melissa.
So, going back to a question, to something you mentioned before, Sherry, you mentioned that you don't get too much in the colors typically, and so there's a question here about whether you're seeing finished products in the specifications, or if people are typically putting them on the drawings, or some firms do a separate section that is maintained by the architect and it's sent over. What do you see most often, and what do you find to be most successful?
I see both. I see either a finished schedule on the drawings or in this one that they'll send me to include in the specification. I don't know that one is more effective than the other. I think they're both great communication tools as long as everything is covered. One of the things I think I mentioned to Faith when we were talking about this is I love that they put ceiling tiles on the finished schedule, but I just wish they would tell me what the grid is. Because I spend so much time looking for what grid is compatible with the particular ceiling that they went with. And why do I take this on myself? I just need to send it back. What's the grid? But I take it on my own and I'm looking up the data sheet and I'm trying to figure out what the options are and doing similar to Faith. I'm doing the research. I'm cutting in, I'm pasting it into an email, say there's 4 grid options. What's your design intent? And if you don't choose one, you're getting 15, you're getting the wide T. But,
We're going to say as selected by architect if you don't respond.
yeah, selected during submittals.
Right.
Something vague. So yeah, that's what I'm seeing. And I think I really like it because, whoa, almost fell over. One of the holdups is always waiting for them to get it to you so that you can put the spec together.
Yeah.
So this way I can get the finished schedule, I can put the spec together and send it to them. And then they can add in their 090600 or wherever they're going to put their finished schedule in the spec, or it's on the drawings. And I can do my little blue beam, check, 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 got it. So it makes the coordination more efficient for me to have it in a schedule. And it's a better quality control checklist for me.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to pipe in here too. I have not personally put a finished schedule in my spec in many years. It's always been on the drawings for the last several years. I will, however, say that I do have a couple of clients who would prefer to have, well, some have exterior finish colors that they ask me to put into the spec. And then I have some clients who want me to put all finished colors in the spec. Which I happily do because they are my client and I live to serve, right? But I have to remind them consistently that this is not the best way because I have to go back and change my color every time you decide to change your color. So I would much rather reference the finished schedule. However, I do understand that there are some that still would like to see it all in the spec.
And I prefer seeing everything, exterior and interior, scheduled if that's what they're going to do. Recently I had a project that changed the color, but I didn't know it.
Right.
When I got a permit set of drawings, I was looking through it and I was like, well, that's not the color. I don't think that's the color that we were talking about.
Right.
Because they had done a great job communicating with me up front. They gave me an Excel sheet, storefront, manufacturer, model number, and finish. Everything, it was beautiful. It was so great.
Yeah.
But then they changed the color and they didn't update that sheet for me. And so I still had the old color in there. I was looking at it, it wasn't making sense. So one spot or the other.
And I think
preferably not in my ball court.
You just reminded me of something we never added to our notes list, so I'm going to bring it up now. And that is the design standards that some firms have and some clients have, just like very thorough design standards, which are super helpful when they are building the same type of multifamily building or mixed use type building. I find those great. However, products continue to change. And if you don't update your standards for years or even for a few months, the products will change. So one of the things that our team has taken on is, as we are incorporating these design standards, we are researching them at the same time to make sure we're not putting something into our spec that doesn't even exist anymore, or that has a different name. I don't remember which conference we were at recently where a product that's always been under one company's name is now under BASF. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but these products are just inconsistently under the same manufacturer's name. And so to be able to update the spec and to let the client know that their standards also need to be updated has been one of the things we've taken on. So
Yeah.
just one more thing.
The other thing, when we were talking about, I think we're kind of moving into QA, QC stuff and working with the design professional is getting all those cost implications included. So going a step beyond your choices, making sure that those choices are not affecting your costs negatively, or, you know, to where we're blowing the budget. How's that?
Right.
Straight out blowing the budget, because we're specifying something that either we didn't know affected the cost, or we as a whole team, the design professional and the spec writer, we didn't realize that it impacted the cost. And so this is the way we've always been doing it, but there's a new product out there where you don't need to have a separate grout sealer. We can use this product instead. Well, those are things that we need to take into consideration also, and things that a spec writer can help with the QA, QC, as well as the other things we've been talking about.
Right. I think one of the great points that you brought up in our earlier discussions, Sherry, was why so many questions? How come the spec writer asked me so many questions, and sometimes I don't know the answer to them? And that's one of the things as we compile our questions that we talked about earlier. Sherry, you mentioned you put every question on there initially, and I found myself putting them on there, but if I realize as a spec writer that we're too early for them to know what that's going to be, I might hide that for right now, so that I'm not overwhelming my client with too many questions that they're just not going to be able to answer.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I've done. And then the other thing that you mentioned was, consider if you were purchasing the item, do you have all the information that you would need to go out and buy that? Is that in the spec? Is it on the drawings? Do they work together?
Yeah.
Those are the questions that we ask.
Yeah. And so oftentimes I'll look for that product on the World Wide Web and try to find the product. And if the contractor was going to purchase this, what would we end up getting in the project? And oftentimes you can't even find it. Not often, I'll say sometimes. I'm not gonna.
Sometimes.
I think the design professionals do a great job.
Right.
There's sometimes where, like Faith mentioned earlier, sometimes it's used from a previous job and it doesn't exist anymore. So having those, doing a little bit more research. If you send me a data sheet, I know that you did the research and I know it's current.
Yes.
So that way.
Highlight those options, please.
Yes. Yeah. So that I know what to buy when I'm going to buy it.
Yes.
And helping with the coordination, that terminology, I think is really important. If it's janitor sink in one room, it's not a wash basin in the other.
Right.
Coiling doors and rolling doors is also a great example of not really sure what we want, but it rolls up, so it must be a coiling door.
It must be, or maybe it's a sectional door.
But it
rolls.
Anyway, let's not get started. That'll be next session.
Next session.
Yeah.
Oh man, I was gonna say something and it just skipped right out of my brain. But I think it has something to do with terminology and that coordination factor. So one of the things that we do also is when we see that you're using overhead coiling doors, for example, since you just said it, we're going to name our section overhead coiling doors, and we're going to refer to it always as an overhead coiling door, because if we used a different term, then we have a new item that everyone's going to be confused about. So we try to match our terminology to your terminology. So let's make sure we all get it right.
Yeah. I see David Axe just added back in the old days. Yeah, David, I love that. In the old days, we had a 3-ring binder, and every time the architect made a decision, they'd circle their options and stick it in the binder.
Yep.
And I've tried to encourage my clients to do that. We set up, a folder
Yeah.
within, our shared folder, and put your products in there and circle what you want. But oftentimes I get products and they're like, no, I circled it. I don't know what happened. Well, maybe you did it in yellow highlighter, which has happened in the past. When you would print something out, circle it with a highlighter. This is pre-Blue Beam even. And then they make a copy of it, but the Xerox machine didn't pick up the yellow highlight. And so they stick it in the binder and there was nothing there. It would still look like it was undone.
I love the term though, back in the old days, because it wasn't that old. When I started 15 years ago, it was still being used at the firm I was working for. And then today I still use that same type of practice. I have a products folder where I store all that information. So yes, I keep that so that I know if they've changed it, we have a record of that too.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I try to incorporate, get my clients to do the same. Sometimes it doesn't work, so.
Yeah. How many times do we have to do it for them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
I'll have all other clients who are really good at providing me a lot of information, and then that becomes a wow, what do I do with all this? Okay, one step at a time. And then David, you're so funny. I know a specifier that used to put black as the default for all the colors so that if the designer did not pick a color, it was going to be black.
That's great.
I like that. Also because it would probably cost more. Is that correct, David? That the black color option
to get
cost
black?
more, so that if they had to do a change order, then it would be a less expensive change order.
Oh, I don't know. They just put in black. So if the designer made a stink, you say, well, read the specs, it says black. So.
I have a client who always wants me to put in custom color as selected by architect. So then when he picks a basic color from the manufacturer's line, is a deduct alternate.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but you'll never get all that money back.
Oh, no, you won't.
Yeah.
So.
But that's their strategy.
I have
Colin, just wrote in, how does price versus quality factor into spec writing decisions? It's a great question. As an independent spec writer, I think a lot of times it is really the architect's decision where they're gonna select their product. As a spec writer, it's my job to do what he wants. I do have the option to say, I know that this product is a green or a red list free product. Especially if I know that my client needs are that they are all red list free, which I have some who are. So that is one of those things where I might pipe up and say, well, if you want to be red list free, then the quality of this product is inferior to the quality of that product. I'm sorry, I was reading David's.
Quality products are more expensive. Yeah, typically. Yeah, I
don't understand.
Mostly true.
I don't understand his question about price versus quality.
I think, Colin, feel free to jump in verbally here. But my understanding of your question is, if we're selecting the product, how does price versus the quality change our decision? Is that what I'm interpreting? Maybe.
Treats, correct.
What's that mean?
Oh, that's correct.
Great. And so, yeah, that's where I would go back to. It's really our architects or our designers' decision, what we are specifying. Our role is to provide information and then to record their decisions properly. Would you agree, Sherry?
Yeah, I would agree with that. If there's something like, if I've learned that there's a way to achieve their design intent for less money and a more sustainable way of doing things, for example, I might suggest that to the architect to consider that, but ultimately they're the architect of record. They're the ones who are making the decisions on behalf of their client. So I don't feel like we can suggest it, but not enforce it by just blindly putting it in there without them knowing it or something.
And there's two other questions that were emailed over. So they're unrelated, but I'm going to read them at the same time. The first one here is, what do you find is the most useful way and frequency in order to receive new versions of the contract document drawings and schedules in the process? So what is your preferred cadence? And the second is much more specific. It's what are your best practices for addendum markups? Do you prefer to add to the header and highlight the impacted text? Is a strike through of removed text within a spec or in the table of contents for a removed section still the best practice for removal? Or do you prefer replacing something with remove by addendum? So how do you handle addenda, and what is your preferred cadence for contract document drawings, schedules, et cetera, to receive from your client?
Okay, thanks for recapping that one. First, my addendum is strike out and, underline the new text and cross out the old. I still do that. And maybe in the header or footer say addendum number, whatever. So
Yeah.
that particular section.
I think that's my preferred method too. And to be quite honest, we usually are, I'm not usually involved in the addendum process, but sometimes I am. I have one client who asked me to put delta numbers next to each line within the body.
Wow.
Which becomes really
That's a lot.
burdensome, I want to say. But I have a system for that now too, because we all love our systems. And so, yeah, I feel like I try to do my best to meet what the client's expectation is. And so that's just another conversation that we have. How would you prefer this to be marked up? My preference would be track changes, turn it
Yeah.
on, here we go.
Yeah. As far as go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna do what you were doing. As far as the cadence of submittals and updated drawings, I have one client who is really good about posting at the end of every week all the progress, which that's their rhythm, and we just try to keep in step with that, and we just update ours. For me, there's some clients, if I can get the current submittal, I'm happy because that's the most information sometimes I've received. And then, I do my very best to be in step with my clients, which is sometimes great and sometimes not great. So just that responsiveness of the client, I think, working for, like Sherry mentioned earlier, so many different clients, it's hard to say everyone does it this way because they don't. So to try to keep in step with how the clients operate. And I think one of the things, as I've been building my team, one of the things I do now also is I match up a personality. So I know that my client likes to be contacted immediately when they receive stuff. I'm going to put Janet on that project because she is really good at responding immediately, versus if somebody wants a really detailed and verbose response, I might handle that one myself or let Amber, so I'm matching my team now with my clients' needs so that they can handle that personality a little bit better. So boy, I don't want to say like we're managing people, but at the same time, like the project itself is going to benefit from a good match. You know what I'm saying? A good team match.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. When you have that option, use it. That use your strength in that way.
Yeah.
For everything. But yeah, I would say majority of my clients post their deliverable as soon as it's due. I think that one of the challenges, of course, is that we're all working on 50% CDs. So I'm working off of 20% DDs or whatever,
Right.
So I'm working off old drawings to try to get my spec to the same level as the spec that we anticipate coming up. So when I start my next phase of my deliverable, I'm using old drawings, which is fine as long as your communication is in place. What's changing? Stay on top of that. I encourage spec writers to participate in those team meetings. I would say most of my clients have weekly team meetings or monthly full team meetings. Read the agenda. They may have nothing to do with you, but go to those meetings, sit in there, work in the background until they say something about you know, spec, whatever, or type or quality, and grab onto that. Because you do miss out when you're not part of the team meetings. I'll get an email that said, you know, per our meeting last Tuesday, I'm like, I wasn't there. What happened?
Yeah.
How come I didn't get copied on the minutes either? Well, what's going on? So
Yeah.
I encourage you to try to get in on those meetings so that you have a say, you've got a voice in the project team. You know, be part of the team, get in the game, and force yourself in if they don't invite you.
I think that's great advice for a spec writer, because we can't sit back and say, oh, nobody's talking to me and getting me involved early, and then not participate throughout the
Yeah.
process. So that's super awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Yeah, stick
bringing
your
that
foot
up.
in the door.
Yeah. Be a little pushy.
Yeah, get pushy. Yeah.
And if you're a designer, invite your specifier.
Yeah,
They can always say
exactly.
no, but they'll want to be in there if they can.
Right.
Exactly. Well, thank you for inviting us to join you today. I
Yeah,
see
thank you
we're
so much.
down to the wire, so I don't want to miss out by
Oh.
saying goodbye.
All right. So are there any, I think we probably have time for one really quick final question. Does anybody have anything you would like to ask? Just put it in the chat.
It's been pretty quiet.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it has.
But thank you for your
That's all right.
participation, David, Colin,
Mhm.
Sharon,
Yeah.
Susan.
Yeah, thank you all. So if we will, our final session in a couple of months is going to be a roundtable discussion. So if you come up with any additional questions, just email them over. But in the meantime, thank you so much to Sherry and to Faith. So it's really interesting and we very, very much appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Mhm.
Take care.